Very good for me, for just a moment. Dear Father God, in this moment of time, I ask that you be here, that your Holy Spirit would come and would be able to direct the words that I speak. I spent the time studying your word. You know your congregation, you know your church. Let the words be spoken, that they may hear and they would be able to feast. At this point, hide thy servant from behind the cross, that they would see more of you and less of me. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. How many of you have had a tough week? Okay, this then is for you. It hasn't been very easy at times. And I know times are very, very tough, and for a lot of individuals with all the things that seem to be happening, we're not too sure where things may go. And therefore, for me, in talking with the Lord this week, as a matter of fact, the last couple of weeks, I've been asking him to impress me. And instead, what I found is he's been able to speak to me with things that I need. And my hope is that in what he has shared with me, I can be able to share with you, and you too can also be blessed. I know it's warm in here, and I know some are very tired, and probably in 10 minutes you may fall asleep. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to share with you the whole meaning of this sermon, and then I'm going to preach it. Okay? There are times in life when we are faced with situations that seem dark, situations that may cause us to question our faith in the promise that we have received from God's Word. Sometimes we struggle with the circumstances in this world that cause us to be distracted away from God as we try to battle and win by our own efforts. Even struggles with our own flesh can become a battle that causes us to focus more on our internal wars rather than on God. But our struggle should not be with these things, for the battle belongs to the Lord. Our strength should be focused on holding on to God and His Word, no matter how dark and no matter how hopeless the situation may seem. Here's the key. Cling to God with all perseverance is all part of loving Him. I don't know if you understand I know with young people, I've worked with them for 25 years now. And we struggle through things. And the struggles that you will go through, scriptures have already answered and given us very sound principles that we could be able to live by. Going through life, Rebecca and Isaac were struggling. They wanted to have children. Rebecca gets pregnant, and it should be the happiest time of her life. And instead, the pregnancy didn't seem to go well, and she was wondering, what's wrong with me? And so she went inquiring of the Lord and said, if everything is okay, why am I feeling this way? And the Lord spoke to her and said this, and if you want to read along, it's in chapter 25, verse 23. And the Lord said to her, 2 nations are inside your womb. 2 people shall be separated from your body. 1 people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. And when it was time the time to be fulfilled, she ended up having 2 children. The first child came out, and he was red and hairy. And so they called him Esau, meaning red and hairy. The second child was grabbing a hold of his heel when he came out. And they decided to call him Jacob, the heel grabber, the supplanter. For all of you that doesn't know what that means, especially young people, it means he was a con man. And so, as time went on, the Bible says that Esau was a skilled hunter, and his father loved him. But Jacob, well, he was a man of tents. He was a mama's boy. and Rebekah loved him. Now, that's not the way it should be. And oftentimes, if you ask, I know in counseling, when I talk to families, thinking about ordinal positions and everything within the family, and I'll ask them the question, who was the favorite child in your family? And everyone here could think of it. I remember in the collegiate Sabbath school when that question was raised, one of the girls said, I know I was the favorite. But everyone here could be able to answer from the family they came from, who was the favorite, you know, whether it was you or whether it was a sibling. And that's not the way it should be. But it tends to go that way. Certain children take on certain characteristics that seem to match that of one of the parents, and the parent becomes fond of that child. And some take on a different. Children get jealous because of that. And that's not right. But understand this, parents, we love the children. And children understand they do love you. A young lady was asked, she had 12 children. I guess cheaper by the dozen, right? 12 children, and she was being interviewed by a reporter, a homeschool mom, and they said, this is ridiculous that you'd have all this many children. And they said, you can't possibly love all your children. And she goes, I love every single one of them the same. And they said, how can you do that? How can you love them all the same? I mean, that's impossible to give them all the same. Isn't there times that some you love more than the others? She says, no. There are times that some will need me more than the others. But my love for each one is still the same. Those that are young, children, youth, understand this. Sometimes within your family, mom and dad may have to pay a little more attention to your brother or your sister. That's okay. When it's time for you, they will spend time with you. You may not know what's going on. But take care in understanding they still love you. Time goes on, and Jacob starts to learn how to live up to his name. Remember, it's a part of his character. As a matter of fact, it was something that was passed down to him from his mom's side of the family. Esau was out hunting one day. Maybe it was a couple of days. Wasn't very lucky. Time, for hunting, it's just sitting around or maybe tracking. And Esau was good at tracking, but this day he just couldn't find any game. And he's making his way back, maybe through the valley, maybe through the mountains, and he smells this wonderful smell. And as he's walking through this area, he notices that Jacob's tent is over here, and the smell is coming from there. He walks up to the tent, maybe pulls back the flap to look inside, and Jacob's got a stew brewing. And it smells so good. And Esau says, brother, give me some of that stew. Give me some of those lentils. I'm hungry. I'm about to die. And Jacob says, what is it worth? He's like, brother, anything, what? And Jacob turns around and says, is it worth your birthright? Now see, in those days, there were two things that were important to an eldest son. One was a birthright. The second was a blessing. And we don't practice this here today. I wish we did. But it's important for both. One, the birthright was this. What Isaac would do was take all of the property he owned and divide it into 3 parts. And what he would do then is that the oldest son, actually the youngest son, will receive 1 part, but the oldest child would receive 2. He would receive a double portion. That was his birthright. The second thing that would happen was the blessing. Now, the blessing was a free gift. It was a grace. It was something that was bestowed on that eldest child. In other words, fathers, as you go through life, as you struggle with your own relationship with God, as you go through your prayer and that relationship, as you receive the blessings that God has given you, you then at some point in time decide before you die that you want to take all of that and place it on your eldest child. And you place this special blessing on top of him. We don't do that anymore. I don't know why. We need to. We need to bless our children. We need to place that special blessing on them. Well, Esau said, fine, you can have the birthright. And Jacob said, well, take an oath. I want you to promise me I'll get it. Is it worth the bowl? And Esau says, yes. Okay, I'll take a goat. I swear, you got the birthright. It's yours. Just give me something to eat. And Jacob hands him his bowl. And Esau ate. And what most folks will tell you, can you imagine what people give up for their bowl of porridge? Can you imagine down here on this earth with young people willing to trade for this earthly bowl of porridge? What are you willing to give up? I know our youth, we talk. I watch them, I see them struggling through things. And my question over and over is, what are you willing to give up? What are you willing to give up for all eternity? What is so great on this earth that it's willing to be your bowl of porridge to give up your heavenly birthright? What are you willing to give up? The Bible says that Esau despised his birthright from that point on. Story goes on. Eventually, Isaac he's advanced in years. And he calls Esau to himself and he says, Esau, I want you to go and get some game. Get some venison and cook it like the way I like it. And I want you to bring it to me that I may eat and be blessed by it so that I could give you my blessing before I pass. There was someone listening. Esau leaves, and immediately Rebekah, who heard this in the background, calls Jacob and says, Jacob, go quickly now, get me 2 goats and that I can cook it and prepare it for you so you will receive that blessing. Jacob, feeling a little nervous, says, but Mom, what if Dad finds out? He's not going to bless me, he's going to turn around and curse me. And Rebekah turns around and says, let that be on me. Please do go and do what I ask. You know, there's some things, Mom and Dad, that we try to get away with, thinking that we could be able to handle the cost, and we can't. And young people, there are some things that we as parents may ask you to do that may not be within God's will. I hope that you learn how to forgive us for it. I don't know how many parents here received a parental license. Are there any? None of us. We didn't have to go to the parent department to be able to get take a special test. You know, to get a little checklist. Okay, well, what do you do during discipline? You know, check one of these 3. What are the different types of ways of acting out behavior? How do you handle it? Check 1, 2, or 3. We never got that. We never received that. Instead, what we have learned how to do, for most of us, we've learned how to, this is the secret, young people, we've learned how to parent the way our parents parented us. For the majority of us, that's what we've done. And you want to know another secret? You're going to learn how to parent your children much to the same way your parent had parented you. There are very few that are willing to go back and study scriptures and learn how God expects it to be. But please, young people, understand we do make mistakes. Several months ago, I was doing a seminar program. It's called Binding the Wound. I was one of the co-facilitators. It's kind of funny because the other co-facilitator was Dr. Ruth, and they called me Dr. Phil. Go figure. But we would have women's would be a part of one group, and the men would be a part of one group, and it was a 22-week program. I had a man in there who was 55 years old. 55 years old, bearing a burden that he will not forget, that he will not forgive his parent for what they had done to him 30-some years earlier. And he was not willing to forgive them. Here he is 55 years later. And he tells me, I just buried my father a year ago. And I asked him, have you forgiven him? And he says, I find it hard to do. And we went through scriptures and I told him, I said, do you realize because you did not forgive your father, the amount of blessings for 30-some years you gave up because you refused to forgive him? You still held him responsible. You still held him in debt. You refused to release him. And therefore, because you were holding on to that, your hands were not free to grasp the blessings that God was willing to give you. There are so many young people that I know that are so angry and so resentful at all the things that have happened in their home. Young people, let me tell you, if that's in your heart, you need to learn how to forgive. You've got to learn how to forgive. You cannot hold that for 50, 60, 70 years. Had a lady 80 years old holding a grudge. You cannot do that and live your life not able to grasp the blessing that God is willing to give you. There are many parents that are still holding it on. Let it go. Let it go. Time went. The meal was all prepared. And Jacob goes in. And Jacob, as he walks in, and the father immediately asks him, and this is in verse 19, and Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. Now you have to understand, what was his name? Jacob. It meant what? He was a deceiver. Watch the con man at work. You ready? Here's a master deceiver at work. First deception is called the deception of identity. Who is it? I am Esau, your firstborn. Many of us practice the deception of identity. Who are you really? Underneath all that facade of this and that, beyond the job, beyond the relationships, who are you? And you deceive your fellow man by posing an identity that is not really you. I have done just as you've told me. It's called the deception of false works. It's saying that you did something that you really didn't do. Pretending you did something you did not do. Deception of false works. Third one was the deception of fulfilling God's will. I call it name dropping. Isaac says to his son, how is it that you have found the game so quickly, my son? And he said, because the Lord your God brought it to me. The deception of falsifying God's will. The fourth one is, Isaac goes through and says to Jacob, please come near that I may feel you, my son, whether you really are Esau or not. The deception of false impressions. And Isaac, as Jacob came near and he felt him, he says, the voice is that of Jacob's, but your hands and your neck are that of Esau. And he did not recognize him because his hands were hairy, as his brother Esau. Then comes the next one. And he said, are you really my son? And he says, yes, I am. Are you really Esau? The deception of a false oath. Making a false promise just to get what you want. The last one was, he goes through and he says, let me bless you. He finishes the food and he says, come near, let me kiss you. As he comes near and as he drew near, Isaac puts his arm around him and he smells him and he smells his clothes and he says, the smell of Esau. You see, that is the deception of omission. In other words, it's not what he said, it's what he didn't say. Sometimes deception is based on not what you do, but is deceptive based on what you chose not to do. And so then Isaac blessed him. Surely the smell of his son is the smell of the field which the Lord has blessed. Therefore, may God give you the dew of heaven and the fatness of this earth, and plenty of grain and wine, and let people serve you, and nations bow down to you, and be a master over your brethren. Let your mother's son bow down to you. And Jacob got up, and he quickly left. In comes Esau. He's put everything together, and Isaac's saying, "Who are you?" "I'm Esau." "What do you mean, Esau?" "I'm Esau, your oldest son." And Isaac has to say, "I think I've given the blessing to the wrong person, because your brother has already come in and received it." The Bible talks about Esau getting angry, very angry. And he says, hasn't he rightfully be called Jacob, the supplanter, the con man? Because he's conned me these 2 times. Not only has he taken my birthright, but now he's taken my blessing. Little time goes on, and sibling rivalry is not even the word. But you could see as Esau probably went past Jacob and looked at him and said, "When Daddy dies, I'm coming after you. I'm going to kill you." Time goes on. Rebecca's getting a little bit nervous, a little bit concerned about it, and so she decides that it's time now for Jacob to leave, go somewhere else. And he talks to Isaac and tells him, "I'm going to die if I have to go through what Esau is dealing with his own wives. Send Jacob away so that he can marry someone of our own kind." And so he does. He sends him on his way. Now, I don't know about a lot of young people, you're here and, you think you're all that. You think that you're really, you've got it all together here. And you think that in this neighborhood, in this woods, you're doing really, really well. You may be all that here, but you know what? You go into someone else's woods, it's a brand new story. Because you think you're the best con man here. In someone else's wood, there's someone better than you. Jacob leaves. And on his way there, I don't know if any of you have had time to be alone. I know when I talk to a lot of students I work with, I tell them, you need to spend time alone sometime. Go out in the woods. Go out somewhere in nature. But I'll do it alone. You see, you really know who you are when you discover who you are when no one else is around. When no one's around. Many times I've done that. Jacob goes. He's walking, he's running, he's thinking, okay, maybe at any moment Esau is going to find out and he's going to be right there after me. He goes several days' journey away. In that loneliness, he's talking to the Lord and saying, "Lord, I know that what I've done is wrong. I know that maybe what I've said is wrong. The way maybe I've lived my life is wrong. I've been a deceiver. I've been a con man. I've been a thief. I've been a supplanter. I've lived up on my name. For my name is Jacob." See, there's 2 things, young people, that you're going to get. One is you're going to get a name that mom and dad give you, okay? A name that they give you. Second thing is there's a name you make out of yourself. 2 things. One is given to you, the other you made. Jacob was given a name at his birth that was his birth omen. But he lived up to his name. It became the course of his life. It was a piece that he would have to change. And most of you, have you gone to a store and looked up what your name is or even looked it up in a book? Okay? You know what your name means? I remember I went to a store, and I went to a Christian store, and I thought, okay, well, it's going to give me a fantastic meaning of my name. So I go through, and they have those little racks, and you spin it around, and then you pull the name out, and you read it. It says, Philip, lover of horses. Yeah. A friend was with me, and she looked at hers, and it meant Lily of God. I was lover of horses. And I was feeling kind of down about it. She goes, oh, we love you. I said, well, I love you too. And then she got it. She turned around and she said, you're not funny. So anyone has the name Philip, just think about it. I'm the only person that can say I love you and call you a horse. There's something about a name. You live by it. When you hear a name like Ted Bundy or Mason or Hitler, there's something behind a name compared to when you hear a name like Abraham Lincoln, Mahatma Gandhi. There's something in a name. Jacob had a name problem. It was in his name. He took a stone for a pillow. He laid down, and it was his darkest moment. And in that moment, the Lord decided to give him a vision of a ladder that reached to heaven and touched earth. And upon this ladder was angels going up and down. And when the Lord came to him, he was saying, said this, behold, I am with you, and I will keep you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land, for I am not leaving you until I have done what I've spoken to you. You see, it was the God of his grandparents, Abraham. It was the God of his father, Isaac. The blessing was just beginning. And he came. He woke up. He said, God must be in this place. The Bible says that, that ladder, in the book Patriarchs and Prophets, Ellen White says that ladder was Jesus Christ. And he knew. Time went on, and time is short for me, so I'm going to skip through many parts of this. You remember how, you think about how hard life is in the name. How hard it is can you imagine going up to a young lady and she says what's her name, and her name is Lily of God, and Jacob goes up and says, my name's Con Man. A man with that kind of name, you better watch out. But that's what, so he goes down and he finds a man named Laban. And he finds a young lady that he ends up getting married to. And things were all perfect. Just so happens that the one that she spent 7 years for was not the one he thought he had in his wedding night. 2 wives. Let me tell you something. It's one thing when you got 2 brothers fighting over birthrights and blessings. It's a whole nother thing when you've got 2 women fighting over 1 man. Okay? There was a fight. And then went through this process. And Jacob, as he's going through this, he's been duped by Laban 10 times over pay, over his wife, over everything he had, and finally, he's had it. And it's time to go home after 14 years. It's time to leave. And he can't tell Laban this, he has to do it in secret. And so he leaves. And as the Bible goes through and talks about how Laban came and confronted him, it was one thing, but then he's going back to his roots. You see, young people, the seeds you plant now, okay, the seeds you put in the ground now, the fruit of those seeds you will have to eat later on. And if you're planting bitter seeds now, the fruit you will eat down the road will be bitter. But if you're planting sweet seeds now, the fruit you will receive is going to be sweet. There's a lot of young people I know that are planting some bad seeds. There are habits you are developing that are not good. There are secrets you are keeping that are not right. And there's something, a person is only as sick as their deepest secret. Pay attention to what you do. You think you're worried about if mom and dad finds out? Think about this. God already knows. Okay? He already knows. Time goes on, and Jacob has a choice to make. A servant comes back and says, Esau is coming, and he's got 400 warriors with him. Esau's coming back to fulfill his promise. Actually, in his mind, it wasn't a promise, it was a fact. I'm going to kill you. Esau's coming, and he's scared, and he divides his family up, and he has part of his family on one side, another part on the other side, and in the middle of the night, he's pleading with the Lord. I don't know if you've ever been in the worst day of your life, in the middle of the night. Let me tell you something. You know the difference between God and man? Man's going to come to you and meet you at high noon. You know what God does? He comes to you and meets you in the middle of the night. He's worried, and he's praying, and he's struggling, and he's fighting over the issues of his past. He's fighting over what he has to deal with in his present. He's unsure about what's happening in the future. He has responsibilities, and he doesn't know how to fulfill them. And he's crying, and he's pleading, and he's calling out to God for help. And in that moment, a hand reaches out and touches him on his shoulder. I don't know if you guys know how to fight. I don't know if you've ever had to wrestle. I know what it's like to wrestle. I remember a young man that wanted to kill several individuals. And I cornered him in a hallway at a shelter. And my supervisor says, you know what? He's not going to go down easy. Take him. And I had to grab a hold of him, and I had to take him down to the ground. 45 minutes, my muscles were hurting. We already had a call to a police officer, and I'm on the ground just holding him. He's banging his head. He's cursing at me. He's spitting, and I'm holding him. Officers finally come, and Deputy 5 decides that it's time for me to let him go. And I try to explain to him, you don't want me to let him go. He said, let him go. I let him go, and the first thing this young man did is grab his gun. And I'm back on him again, wrestling him back down again. See, we wrestle with things, we wrestle not with flesh and blood, but principalities and powers in high places. We wrestle with things every single day. College students, you wrestle with things every single day. We struggle with it. Jacob was wrestling for his life. He didn't know if it was Laban changing his mind or if it was Esau coming at him at night. All night long he's fighting. All night long he's struggling. He's putting some moves, and this being puts some moves back. He's fighting, and eventually the being turns around and says, look, dawn's coming. Let me go. And he doesn't. Immediately the angel touches his leg, and he goes limp, and he's like, let me go. And Jacob says these words. He's clinging on tight. I will not let you go until you bless me. Have you ever been in that moment? I know those that are 40 and older, you know you've been there. Where you've struggled with God to the point that you're just, all you want is his blessing. That's all you want. You've gone through it all. You've gone through the battle. You just want him to bless you. And young people, let me tell you something. Never let go. No matter how ugly and how bad times get, don't let go. Don't let go. Cling on and hold on. Because I'm telling you, as dark as those moments are, as frustrating as those moments are, the longer you hold on and ask him to bless you, you will not believe the blessing you will receive. Hold on. Don't let go for the frivolous things. Jacob holds on, and he's holding on. The angel turns around and says, see, the way God is, he doesn't mess around. He heads straight for the point. What's your name? What's your name? What's my name? My name's liar. My name's thief. My name's con man. My name's supplanter. My name's Jacob. And now the blessing. No longer will you be called Jacob, but now you'll be called Israel, because you've wrestled with God and you've wrestled with man, and you've prevailed. Jacob, you made it. You made it. Jacob limps away. And as he limps away, he knows he still has to face Esau, and he sets up gifts in front to go ahead of him and his family behind him. And there he is, and you know he didn't have time to clean up. And if you've ever been in what I call a scrap match, you know what it looks like. All cut up, maybe his fingers are all bleeding, toes are all bleeding, dirt all over his body, hair, grass still in his hair, stains on his robe, green grass stains everywhere. And he's limping along. Esau stops with his army of 400, and he's angry. You know, there's times when gifts won't do. The gifts go forward, and then comes Jacob, bowing down, giving honor and respect to Esau as the oldest son. Esau looks at him as he's limping his way towards him and bowing down, and he looks like he's been in a serious scrap match, beaten up. And he's walking towards him, his heart starts to break, and he runs to him, clings onto him, and they both start to cry. See, Jacob made it. That was the struggle. It was about his name. See, you see, this is for you. I don't know how many of you are graduating this year. I remember in 1990 I was graduating. I graduated from CUC, had 2 bachelor degrees, and I couldn't get a job. Couldn't get a job. I was depressed. All my friends, I went to SIGO school, went to Tacoma Academy. All my friends were gone to other colleges and universities. And I was still here in Silver Spring, stuck. And I was tired, a little angry, a little upset, wondering why the Lord wouldn't bless me. And I put out resumes all over the place, couldn't get a job. Matter of fact, I even wanted to be a youth pastor. I got turned down for that. As time went on, I feeling discouraged. It was around this time, and it was October, November, actually September, October. Feeling really, really bad, couldn't sleep at night. And so I decided I was going to go out. Those that know me know I love to fish. And early 5 o'clock in the morning, I wake up, got my fishing gear together, and decided it's time for me to go fishing. It was a terrible day to fish. It was cold and it was foggy. So I went down to a little lake called Lake Frank near Meadowside. Some of you may know where that is. Went down to Lake Frank and go down to the edge of the water, and I put a lure on and I toss it out, hits the water. I couldn't see anything. It was pitch black. I couldn't see past the fog, and I started reeling my lure back, picked it up, getting ready to throw it out, and there was this green, slimy ooze all over my lure. And I looked down at the water, and there was green muck all over and I'm like, can it get any worse? My mind is foggy as the fog that's out here, and not even a little bit of pleasure of me fishing can even happen. So I decided to walk. And the Lord started to press on me that I need to be dealing with Him. I dealt with everything else, but I wasn't dealing with Him. And so I started to talk. I started to get angry. Now, I don't know about you, but I started to yell. It's nice down there at 5 o'clock in the morning because no one can hear you. And I started to talk to him, and I was real struggling with it. I was like, Lord, I've done all this. And it kept coming back to me, Phil, it's not about you. That hurt my feelings. It's not about what you could do. He says it's what I could do. And I'm still feeling discouraged. It doesn't help me because I still don't have a job. 2 bachelor degrees, no job. Went around to the back part of the lake, and the fog started to lift up. I started to feel a little better. The wind was starting to blow. It blew the muck all the way to the other end of the lake, towards the dam side. And so I went out and started fishing some more. And I started catching some fish. A few crappie, a bass, a couple bluegills. And I looked at the clock, it's like, okay, it was about noon, I need to get home, I'm starting to feel hungry, and so I decided I was going to get back on the trail and start walking. I get back on the trail, I start walking, and this trail had these little bushes that had all these little tiny type of flowers on it, and there were bees on it. I don't like bees. I'm allergic to them. So as I'm walking, the bees are landing on me. So I sent a little prayer up, Lord, please don't let these bees sting me. Lord answered my prayer. I started to run. And as I was running, I slipped off the trail, slipped right up to the edge of the pond, and bang, right on my leg. I'm like, Lord, I asked you not to let these bees sting me. We talked. So I started limping back to my car, which was a half a mile away. I got there, looked at my leg. Boy, it hurt. I mean, it burned all the way up my leg. It was burning. And I finally got into my car and started driving. It was stick shift. That was my clutch leg. And I'm driving all the way down. I got home and I took some Benadryl. And as I'm sitting there and waiting, my brother comes in. I said, Mike, my brother who's the doctor now, Mike, look at my leg. Does that look like a bee sting? He's like, yeah. So I said, well, I need to go down to the doctor. It was swelling up quite a bit. It was hurting. So I went down to the Cherry Hill, little small hospital thing there, and walked in, and the doctor took a look at it. He said, that's not a bee sting. God answered my prayer. He didn't give me a bee sting. He says, that's a snake bite. You know, the Lord has a sense of humor. and so he says, you need to go down to Washamis Hospital and take care of it. So my brother then drives me down there. I'm like, are you sure it's not a bee sting? He takes my tennis shoe, cuts it up, and he says, here's the other fang. So I had one fang in my ankle and the other fang in my shoe. So I get down to the emergency room over at Washamis Hospital, and I try to explain to him that, she goes, well, what's the problem? I said, snake bite. Who's the patient? Me. And so she says, well, what kind of snake bit you? I said, I don't know. And so she says, okay, well, have a seat. So I go back, and then she gives me this paperwork to fill out. So I'm filling out this paperwork. She goes to the doctor, explains to him that some guy out here thinks he's got a snake bite. He brings me in, and sure enough, they immediately have to call poison control, and they're doing all these things, and they do some test to see if I'm allergic or not to the antivenom. They weren't too sure what snake it was. They're assuming it was a copperhead. I'm sitting there and watching them go back and forth through all this craziness. And as I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, Lord, can life get any worse than this? And so they're talking about all the possible things that could happen, and around 6 hours later, I start going into little convulsions, and I'm like shaking, and I can't stop. And the pain on my leg is just, it hurts. Time goes on. Eventually, I don't know how my parents found out, but no, I do. A friend of mine who I left a message on his phone saying, hey, I think I got bit by a snake. I can't find my folks. If you see them, can you tell them to come down to the hospital? Good message. So they call them up, and I think either my dad or my mom got the call, and said, asked where I was because I got bit by a snake, and that I was at a hospital, and that they should go. And I think it was my mom. She hung up the phone without finding out which hospital. And so they eventually find me. I'm there in the hospital, and they're still trying to figure out what to do, and I'm still struggling with things, And as I'm struggling with it, and you struggle about your name, you struggle about your destiny, you struggle about what life's going to be like, and you're sitting there, and I remember the room was dark, and I remember my father and I think my aunt and uncle were getting ready to go home, and they leave, but my mom would not leave. She's like, I'm staying here, I'm not leaving. And so I'm sitting there, and I remember looking over at the nurse, his name was Ken, and I said, I think something's wrong. Because I started to feel my chest get very numb and very, very cold. And I started to feel, it didn't feel right. And I told him, I said, something's wrong. And I remember that my mom started calling up on the phone, telling my dad and my aunt and uncle to come back, something's wrong. I don't remember too much after that. But I remember the next day, A doctor coming in, telling me that they couldn't hear very much of my foot because it was so swollen because of poison. They couldn't give me any antivenom. They just had to flush it out with saline. Every 15 minutes I had to go. And they're flushing it out as far as giving me saline. And the doctor comes in, and I remember him telling me that they are thinking about taking me to surgery to cut my leg off from my knee because they were scared that gangrene was going to set in because they couldn't hear any blood flow from my leg. It's my real leg. Real leg. And I remember I yelled at him and told him to get out, and I got a little ticked off. And they tried everything they can. Almost 10 days later, I'm sitting in with my leg in a cast, up in the air, and they're flooding me with all these type of antibiotics to try to save my leg. And I'm feeling bad. I had a few friends came by, got 2 books. One was Paul. The person thought it was a joke because he got bit by a snake once. And the second one was about Jacob. And I read both books sitting there, and I was alone. I was saying, and I was asking the Lord, I still don't have a job. My friends have left. Life seems kind of down. And the Lord decided he was going to show me. The last Saturday night I was in the hospital, I remember at lunchtime, the dean of women over CEC comes in and says, would you like anything? And I had the bad cravings for German chocolate cake. And she said, no problem. I used to work at the girls' dorm. Whole different story in that. My understanding was they were getting sued and they needed to figure out a way to, so I joked with them. I said, well, you could hire me. It was a joke. They actually did. So I worked at the girls' dorm at the front desk, even overnights. And you learn a lot working there, guys. So she goes and she gets this cake and she brings it in, and it's about 8 o'clock Saturday night. She has the cake, and people started coming in. All these friends. I remember Pastor Halverson coming in, asking how I was doing. We had at least 24 people in my little tiny room. We had the radio playing. I even had the security guard for the hospital in my room, and he was in there telling us all jokes. At 11 o'clock at night, I remember there was a little lady, she was Indian, about that big. She walks in, and she yells at us. She goes, you're making too much noise. It's 11 o'clock at night. You need to leave. If you don't leave, I'm going to call security. So she did. And so, he had to leave, and he leaves, and he comes back, and he says, they called me to come to this room. They said there's a disturbance. I'm like, yeah, that's you. She comes in, she goes, see, security is here. I called security. And we're like, he's the one making us all laugh. We went through it. And I realized that the Lord was saying to me, you are blessed. You're blessed. You have your friends. They're still there. They're there when you need them. But even more so, I will never leave you. I will never leave you. It wasn't too long after that I got my first job, working in a residential program, working with kids that a majority of them had committed murder, either one or two. And in that program, as I went in and started to go through orientation, I remember seeing a man. He came up to me, and he looked at me, and I went through all this struggling, but he looked at me, and he was a big guy. He was about 6'10", 6'11", weighed well over 300. I mean, he was big. He played for, I think it was NFL, Atlanta Falcons or something like that. Big guy, he was a tight end, okay? And he walks up to me. His name was Shake. And I asked him, I said, why do people call you Shake? He says, because when I hit them, they shake. Okay? So he walks up to me, and he looks at me, and he says, you're a little guy. He's like, do you know how to wrestle? What do you mean? He said, do you know how to wrestle? And all I could say is, do I know how to wrestle? I know how to wrestle. And I limp away.